We will now proceed to the next session of the Cognitive Science Connect Singapore 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome the chairperson of the music session, Prof. Chan, to take the stage.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Good afternoon, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am Associate Professor Chancellor from the YSTCM Conservatory of Music here at NUS. I'm truly delighted to be chairing this fascinating session on cognitive science in relation to a particular interest of area of mine, which is music performance. I'm sure by now you are familiar with the background of our two distinguished speakers, but I would like to share with you why their work fascinates me. One of Professor Charles Lamb's areas of expertise is in implanting hearing devices, for which he enjoys considerable renown. The fact that he could still find time to research musicians' brain processes, particularly during the improvisation, musical improvisation, must mean that his own processes clearly require less than 24 hours a day, which is certainly only the amount that I was endowed with. Professor Lanskey, on the other hand, finds a parallel universe along his direction of our great conservatory here at NUS, and his performances around the globe. And all that must somehow connect into his explorations of the work of the musicologist David Huron, and in particular, David Huron's book, The Sweet Anticipation. So, here, ready to share their thoughts on these respective realities and to satisfy our own anticipation processes, may I present to you Professor Charles Lamb from the Johns Hopkins Medicine and Professor Bernard Lanskey from the YSTCM Conservatory of Music and NUS. Professor Charles Lamb speaks first.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's such an honor to be here. It's my first time in Singapore, and I just got here this morning. And so if I fall asleep in the middle of my presentation, you'll forgive me. I didn't realize that after speaking right after Dr. Shaw that he was a magician. And he was really showing us some pretty remarkable things. What I took away, though, from his talk was that it was very quiet. There's not a lot of music. And it sort of makes me think that there's kind of two people in the world. There's some people that see things, and there's some people that hear things. And I've never really been somebody that sees things. I've always been a person that hears things. And for me, my whole life has been about sound. And now, I think this is maybe one of the strangest things to me about life and about what I care about, which is that acoustic vibrations in the air, invisible things, just vibrations in the air, will reflect on our eardrum and somehow translate into a very profound, meaningful percept. And to me, the fact that happens, the fact that you can hear me speaking, but more so when we start talking about something abstract like music, it's just a remarkable thing that I've wondered about my whole life. I think many of you in here are musicians, and you probably realize that this process of sound becoming important, and some of you would change your life for this. Okay? You're changing your life because of the importance of sound to you. You're devoting your whole life, your whole studies, everything you think about, to understanding why something sounds beautiful to you. To me, that's a profound statement. I've spent my whole life trying to understand this. Now, I think I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. So, I am I'll call myself a very poor musician. Okay? I wish more than anything else that I were a professional musician, but sometime around college years, I just thought to myself, you know what? I do not have what I want to have in music to make a career of it. I wasn't going to change the world in music. And so I decided to go into medicine. And for me, there was a lot of overlap. See, for me, I cared about music because it was all about life. It was about life, beauty, death, everything profound I cared about was reflected in music. And for me, medicine was in some ways the kind of tangible reality of what I cared about in music. It was the ability to keep people alive so they could keep listening to music. And so And so I went into medicine, and the more I learned about medicine, I realized it was actually a field of medicine that dealt with hearing. And so I became a hearing specialist, which was a pretty natural choice for me. It was the easy thing to say, you know what, now that I'm a doctor, let me try to understand how people hear things. Let me try to take somebody who's deaf and make them hear something when they never heard it before. And so I'm going to, if we can get this to work, I'm going to try to play a little music for you. And let's just try to think about what this means. Is there anybody in here who does not feel slightly better now after having heard this than they did 5 seconds ago? You just feel better. No, you don't feel better? All right. Stevie's not going to like that. So for some reason, we care about music, and it's not entirely clear why. Now, as a hearing specialist, one of the most regrettable things that I've learned is that in medicine, this is what we do when we want to understand hearing. Okay? So we do a lot of blips and bleeps, and for me, it was really, really frustrating to realize that even though I wanted to understand music, what I was going to understand is somebody's ability to hear a blip or a bleep. And it's not that blips and bleeps aren't fascinating. They actually are really fascinating, as fascinating as shapes. But it's for me, if all I did was listen to blips and bleeps, I would never really get to this level of what I consider beauty or what I consider profound. And so I started to, after my medical training, I went to learn functional brain imaging at the National Institutes of Health as a way to try to understand some of these complex questions of music. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about creativity today and how the brain is able to create things. And this has been an interest of mine because I'm a jazz player and because I love jazz. And for those of you that don't know a lot about jazz, we'll try to do a little crash course today on what's involved with jazz. Now, there are many, many different kinds of creativity, and I'm not here to tell you that jazz or rap or any of these things are the only forms. By no means. We're going to see this twice today. There's architectural creativity, athletic creativity, culinary creativity, a lot of that in Singapore, scientific creativity, even surgical creativity, believe it or not. And this is my surgical team doing a cochlear implant. And then musical creativity. And so this is a video I'm going to show you of Keith Jarrett, who plays completely improvised concerts. By what I mean is that he will take, without any a priori score or real concept of what's going to happen, just sit down and play. And here's an example of that. You'll agree with me that that's pretty awesome. And that is amazing stuff. I mean, he's improvising that on the spot. He'll never play it that same way again. He's never played it that way before. How can we do that? That's a question that I've always thought about as a listener, just as a musician, as an admirer. I thought, wow, that's pretty awesome. How does he do that? The more I started thinking about it, the question seemed more pressing. Wow, how does he do that? And so I thought, well, let's actually see if we could try to figure out how he does that. And so I think it's worth saying a little bit about why music. You know, I don't think that music is something that's just kind of a curiosity. Right? I think actually music is very fundamental to who we are, and history shows this. And music has existed in all cultures, in all histories, as far as we've ever known. Okay? This is a pretty interesting phenomenon. Here is a bone flute thought to be carved from the femur bone of a bear that dates somewhere between 50 and 80,000 years old. Think about this. Human beings 50 to 80,000 years ago are making musical instruments? For what? I mean, don't they have to survive? I think they're pretty busy. They have a lot on their plate. Their daily schedule should be pretty full of things trying not to get killed. yet they're making musical instruments. And then what are they playing? There's no written music, there's no radio, there's no scores, there's no teachers. How do they know what to play? Well, they're probably improvising. And so I think that improvised music was probably the original music. It was probably the voice, not a flute, that was the first instrument. But I think that music is really a part of human fabric way back from our earliest days. And so I think that there's something in us that is intrinsically linked and hardwired to want to hear music. There's a lot of arguments about the origins of music in terms of evolution. But I'm going to start steering us towards this question of how it is that we can actually create it. Now, there are a lot of ways to define creativity, and I don't want to, we could do this all day long, and these kinds of things kind of drive me crazy because in the end I think that you know it when you see it. But creativity is the generation of novelty. It's coming up with something new. It's associated with a lot of parallel constructs, problem solving, lateral insights, sudden flashes of brilliance, eureka moments. And so I'm going to suggest here that jazz improvisation is one model for studying spontaneous creativity in the artistic domain. And so for those of you that think that just because music's improvised means that it can't be sophisticated, I want to try to dispel that notion with an animation of John Coltrane's Giant Steps. Okay? And so you're going to hear him play the melody twice, and then you're going to hear him start to improvise. Here's the first melody. Again, pretty awesome stuff, and this is music that's improvised spontaneously. This music is, I mean, I think probably nobody here, even if we're given 5 years, couldn't write a solo like that, of that harmonic complexity and that much interest. And he did it on the spot over and over again in different takes of this masterpiece called Giant Steps. And so it's a pretty unique phenomenon, and it allows us, because of the kind of compressed time space that jazz occurs in, you can kind of use that to your advantage scientifically and say, well, you know what? Let's take somebody who spent their whole life learning how to get into this flow state like that, and they can turn it on right away, and all of a sudden all this music pours out of them. Let's take jazz musicians and see if we can learn something from them. And so the whole idea of doing this rests on this notion that artistic creativity is a neurologic product. And this is not a concept that I thought would be troubling. But when I first started talking about this, especially to musicians and artists, they were like, the first time, wait a minute. What do you mean it's a neurologic product? I was like, it's a neurologic product. It's a product of your brain. And they're like, how do you know that? I was like, I don't know how I know that, but I don't think that you could do it without a brain. And so, you know, it was really fascinating for me to hear all of these kind of debates emerge about whether or not artistic creativity is a product of the brain. But I think that actually most musicians are now kind of coming around to the fact that, well, it's got to be a product of the brain, interface with the environment, interface with your body, and that the brain is probably as good a place to start as anywhere. And so the first thing we really needed is something like this, okay? We needed some way to look inside a jazz musician's head while they're doing what they do. And so functional MRI, which we heard a little bit about today, is a pretty neat modality, but it's fraught with complications. And so the one take-home point I want you to get, ironically, is that fMRI is far from perfect, far from ideal. Okay? In fact, it's really terrible at a lot of things. But I use it all the time, and it's because, as far as I know right now, the best thing available for me for what I want to look at. And so, you know, most I'm sure if you've ever been in an MRI scanner, you know that it's not like the Blue Note or the Village Vanguard. Okay? It's just not the most conducive environment for jazz.